Well, welcome to episode 3 of the Afterword, coming to you live from Glenside, Pennsylvania. My name is Josiah Pettit. I'm the director here at the Westminster Bookstore. And tonight we are honored to welcome Mark Vroegop and Trillia Newbell for a conversation on race, diversity, and lament. Johnny Gibson, who's our normal host, is away on vacation, so we asked Trillia if she'd be willing to step in and interview Mark tonight, and so we're delighted to have her on sort of as a bonus guest. Trillia has written and contributed to several books, including Sacred Endurance, Finding Grace and Strength for a Lasting Faith, as well as the children's book, God's Very Good Idea, a true story of God's delightfully different family. She also contributes to Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition and is an acquisitions editor at Moody Publishers. Mark Vroegop is the lead pastor at College Park Church in Indianapolis and is the author of Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, Discovering the Grace of Lament. Dark Clouds was one of those books that when it was first released a few years ago, we just could not keep it in stock. And since then has been a book that I've returned to often personally, particularly for giving away to friends and family who've lost loved ones. Dark Clouds was named the 2020 ECPA Book of the Year. Most recently, Mark published Weep With Me, How Lament Opens a Door for Racial Reconciliation. And both of Mark's books I don't have copies of because I've given my last ones away recently to friends. And I think as a testament to both of those books that they're ones that I find myself buying often. And in fact, the only reason I have Trillia's book, God's Very Good Ideas, because I borrowed it from my 3-year-old. So Levi, I'll give it back after this episode. But both Trillia and Mark are some of our favorite authors, and God's Very Good Idea and Weep With Me in particular are ones that as a team have been very helpful to read as we've been thinking through the complex and polarizing issues surrounding race and diversity. So we're especially excited to have them on tonight for this conversation. You can find all of their books on our website at wtsbooks.com/afterword. So with that, let me turn it over to Trillia with a question. What are some of your favorite books that you've used in your own counseling and parenting, speaking, and teaching? Can you share a story or two about how you've used books in ministry? Trillia?
Hello. So I'm asked the question, what are some of the books that I would have suggested in counseling? And here's the answer. I'm actually not going to answer that question. So since I'm live, I can do whatever I want. I'm going to answer what has ministered to me. Because when I'm counseling someone, I'm typically going to be waiting and listening to them rather than sharing books with them, or I might share some scripture, but it's not typical that I am going to throw books at them. So for me, I often, I've experienced 4 miscarriages, Mark. And so lament is something very near and dear to my heart. I didn't really learn and understand lament until my 2nd miscarriage. And Future Grace by John Piper, he has a chapter in it on despondency. And I didn't understand what it meant to be despondent until that moment when I couldn't get out of bed. And his book just helping me understand that Jesus, not just a man of sorrows, but wept and related so deeply and dearly with my sorrows and my pain. It revolutionized, I guess, the way that I understood pain and was able to be really honest with the Lord about my sorrows. And then the Psalms, which of course, again, isn't a book that you would recommend, but in terms of our physical books. It is a book, but but I run to the Psalms. Okay, and then another book, The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Tim Keller. Have you ever read the book? It is so helpful in ministry. So one of the things, there's so many pitfalls and things that we could fall into, and traps really in ministry, I think, in regards to overly thinking about ourselves. And it helped me to serve better, to go on a stage and be able to speak to people and forget about myself and entrust all of it to the Lord. And so those two books in particular were very helpful and meaningful to me. And then there's other history books or books like The Warmth of Other Suns and other books that have inspired and encouraged me. But if we're talking about counseling, I think those two books in general benefited me. What about you?
Well, I'm glad to hear that you don't throw books at people. I tend to do that, though. I throw them at them, not literally and physically, because to me, a good book is like a good friend that just kind of walks alongside you. And it's interesting, even you described it, that there's particular moments when, you need a message, and you need that message in a way that is able to be paced with kind of where you're at, and to be able to be digested in maybe a different way than a conversation or a sermon, something you can kind of just marinate in for a while. I think The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul, while in college, was the first book that just kind of blew my mind in terms of the bigness of God. And also just wrestling at a personal level with just who is God, what is he like? And, R.C. Sproul just helped me to see a huge view of what God is not only like, but who he needs to be in my life. While my wife and I were doing premarital counseling, we read a book aloud to each other. We read Christian Living in the Home by Jay Adams. And it was just a delightful experience where we were sitting at like a Bob Evans restaurant. Yeah, I really splurged for these date nights. And we were sitting there reading these there we go, reading these books to each other. And then we would just underline important sentences that we felt like were meaningful. And then with our premarital counselor, we would review what it was that we underlined. And it created an ability to have a conversation with a counselor, but also just kind of a meeting point for us then to talk about really important subjects that, you just maybe wouldn't talk about without the presence of a book in your life. Interestingly enough, and I talk about this in my book, Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, when our daughter died, and we found out that she had died in utero. But before we went to the hospital, I stopped at my church office to grab a few things, knowing that I was going to be away for the office for a number of days. But I wanted to grab a couple of books, and the book that I grabbed was part of the Swans Are Not Silent series on the life of John Bunyan, The Fruit of Affliction, and William Cooper. And I remember sitting in our hospital room, reflecting not just on the content of what I was receiving, but also the life story of other people who had suffered and how God had used those hardships in order to just illumine a path for them moving forward. And so, the supremacy of God in preaching is another one, informed how I see the event on a Sunday morning of bringing God's word and the intersection between the Bible and the glory of God meeting in the preaching moment. So, yeah, books have been really important in shaping. And one of the conversations I often have with someone that maybe I'm trying to get to know, or, hey, what are the 5 books or 3 books that have most shaped your life? You can tell a lot about a person by the books that have served as kind of the foundation of their life.
No, I think you're exactly right. Well, I think we're going to be talking about my job a little here.
We are. Yeah. In fact, that's my role to ask you this next question, which is, so my understanding is that you're now an acquisitions editor at Moody, and that's a pretty cool title. That means like you get to get things. Your goal is to grab stuff, to acquire things. So I bet a lot of people don't know what an acquisitions editor does. So why don't you tell us what you acquire?
Well, I say this is not my job description, but it is my job description. I get to look for evidence of grace and potential in people all day long. So I am looking for people who can write books to encourage the church, It is absolutely one of the most thrilling things that I've been able to do in the last, 2 months. I've just started. And it's been a joy. I love it. So an acquisitions editor, they are the people who decide on what books are published in publishing houses. So we evaluate proposals, we think of ideas, we may approach an author who, someone we see or we know or we've seen an idea, or often they come to us, and we then decide on whether to publish that with a board. It's usually not just me deciding, but it kind of, I just, in a lot of ways, it is my job. My position is to decide books. And so it is a joy to get to acquire books and authors. And I love books. So I want to make that clear, that my not throwing books at people is not because I don't love books. I love books. Look behind me, all around me. But that's what I do as an acquisitions editor.
So, I mean, come on, you've been doing this job for 2 months. First of all, let me ask you: was this your dream job? Did you think you'd be an acquisitions editor, or because of your writing, did you kind of say, you know what, this could actually be a pretty cool thing? Did you ever see yourself as an acquisitions editor?
You know, I am one of the strangest people. I have zero goals in life. I don't really actually know how I've done the things I've done because I don't have any big dreams, or I oddly don't. So I would say it wasn't like this massive dream of mine. I think it was a natural progression from my ministry. So I was a freelance journalist writing for a secular paper, and then I started writing books and articles, and what I realized I was doing is I was always connecting people with agents or people with publishers. I was already doing the work, or I would talk to a friend and say, you really should write on this. And so I was doing that work of an acquisitions editor for free. And so thankfully this position opened up, and it is a really great place for my various gifts all combined in one. Just a bit of a visionary and I want to support others and other people in their ministry. And so yeah, I wouldn't say it was something I dreamed of, only because that's not my MO. It's not how I operate, but it is something that I love and I'm grateful for.
So, Haddon Robinson, who taught at Dallas Seminary, he taught in homiletics. He said that, he wasn't the guy who knew how to preach very well, but as a seminary prof, he had to listen to the worst sermons ever. So my question for you is, surely as an acquisitions editor, you come across, I'm sure, a lot of great content, but I guess, and that you shouldn't tell us anything, but there's got to be some stuff you're just like, for real? Like, there's no way, right? Right?
Well, I mean, so when you receive something and you think, okay, I think about the very first proposal that I sent was terrible. It's terrible. And so it was rejected, and it should have been, because I was just learning. I didn't know really what I was doing, but thankfully I had someone to help me and to coach me. And now I'm continuing to learn and grow. So the answer is, of course, there are chapters or proposals that often what you get are people who are writing and trying to do too much. So they think, this is it. This is my only book I'll ever write. So I'm going to write every thought down. And that's not what, it's not effective. It's not clear. It's rare that I get something yet where it's completely just, you can't read it. It's just like, I have not had that experience.
All right. Well, and you've only been on the job 2 months, right? So I think what people need to know when they're listening to this podcast or watching this video is that you're a nice acquisitions editor. So that's awesome.
Good acquisitions editor, where I can coach you, I can help you, I can encourage you so you can grow in this.
Man, your inbox is going to be flooded now. So I get this from people, send me an email and say, hey, I'd like to be a writer, how did you do it, et cetera, et cetera. What tips would you have for aspiring authors if they've got a amazing book idea and they're like, Moody should publish this? What do they do?
Okay, so they're an aspiring author. Have they written before? I would have a lot of questions for them. So
All
have
right,
you?
let's start this. They think, I would like to write a book. Someday, somehow, somewhere. Where do they start? Do they start by just writing a book someday?
No. So because here's the thing, a lot of people say to me, I would love to write a book. And I say, okay, send me 1,000 words. I probably received 1,000 words from about 2 people. Why? Because writing a book, as you know, Mark, is very difficult. And so everyone who aspires to write a book, they actually don't want to write a book. They want to have written a book, or they may have romanticized what it's like to write a book. But we know it's a lot of labor. It's often lonely. It's not what people think it is. And so I dig a little bit deeper and ask them, okay, what are some ideas that you have? I would tell them to write on articles, write a journal, write on a blog. I would also tell them to read a lot. And then I would encourage them in a certain direction, depending on what it is that they really. So if you came to me, Mark, and said, hey, I think I have another book idea, that would be a really different conversation than, say, someone who's never written a book before. So Crossway, I just want you to know I'm trying to get Mark right now. I'm just kidding. And so that would be a very different conversation. So I think we'd have to dig a little deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, writing a book, my last book was 40,000 words. So it's writing 1,000 words 40 times, right? I mean, so in one respect, it isn't complicated, but it's really, really challenging and hard. It's certainly not an easy task for anybody. And then to have something important, or at least something that you think is helpful to say, is also pretty critical. So children's books, you've written this wonderful book called God's Very Good Idea. I love it. What was it like writing a children's book? And then how different was that from maybe your other book, United, and just kind of how those things are just so really different? Same kind of theme, but really different angles. And one is a bus and one doesn't, so.
Yeah. So it's kind of, think of this. Take this word, imago Dei, and put it in one word that a 3-year-old can understand. That is writing a kid's book. It is taking big, massive concepts and ideas in theology and narrowing it down in such a way that a child can, if they may not understand, but they'll get a little, and eventually they will hopefully understand it. And then trying to make it memorable, something where there's rhyming or something that kind of has a rhythm to it, repetition, so that they can get it in their little hearts and minds. So it is very different because you're not working on trying to make a sentence sound good. It's trying to make one word make all the sense and sum up some theological concept, because it is a Christian book, and make it, hope it sticks. So that was my experience. Every kid author is probably a little different, but my experience was trying to take some of the big concepts that racial reconciliation, what is that? And or the gospel, and trying to explain it in such a way that kids can understand. And so it was a fun venture, and one that I look forward to doing again, which I will soon enough. And yeah.
So dumb question, because I've never done a kid's book before. Do you start with the illustrations as a concept, or do you start with the words as ideas? Which comes first there, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, so for me, because I deal with words, I wrote it, and then she, the illustrator, based the idea off of my words.
So you didn't illustrate your own book?
Oh, no. That would be, if you look on Twitter right now, I have a picture.
I saw it today. Kung Fu Panda, right? That was amazing. Your husband killed that drawing. You, on the other hand, should stick to writing. So, sorry.
Exactly. God gives many gifts.
Oh yeah.
That's not mine. So
It is.
I'm not
I
illustrate my
appreciate
own.
your ministry, but you're right. Yeah, that's not yours. Stick with writing. So yeah.
Yeah. So Catalina did a wonderful job of illustrating God's very good idea and illustrating all of the book in that series, the tell the truth by the Good Book Company. It's just this beautiful stuff. But the words came first, and then she illustrated. I do not. She did such a great job. She sent them, and the director, the art director from Good Book sent them, and I gave my ideas and thoughts, but she took off. Yeah.
That's awesome. How long does it take to produce a children's book compared to, is it faster, or is it because of the need for really clear but simple language, does it take longer?
So produce or write. So those are two different. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I mean, how long does it take to publish? How long did it take me to write?
Yeah.
It didn't take me that long. It maybe took me about 2 months, month and a
Okay.
half, because it's 500 to 600 words,
Right.
and getting it, just narrowing it. So
Right.
I would write, and then we'd edit, and then I'd write, and then we edit down and trim more. So it's a really different experience and process than writing.
Right.
Yeah. And so it was good. Well, Mark, I think it's time to think about Dark Clouds. What do you think? I'd like to.
It's raining here in
No.
Indianapolis, so that's fine.
Well, in Dark Clouds, you say that it took you a decade to write. So we were just talking about kids' book that took me a minute to write. Not really, maybe a month, but it took you a decade. Now, it could be, well, I don't want to answer your own question. Why did it take you a decade to write and develop before ultimately publishing it?
Yeah, I wanted to put something in print on the subject of lament or grief for over 10 years. I just didn't know exactly how I wanted to say it because there were so many books that were written on grief. But what I kept running into and had this deep pastoral angst is I would share a thought with somebody who was grieving based upon our own experience, what I'd studied in the scriptures, or preached a series on it. And then afterwards, someone would say, hey, have you like put this together in some way that I could explore this further? And I kept saying, no, man, somebody should write that. No, 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 no. And eventually I got tired of saying, no, no one's done that. And so it was a 10-year journey of just kind of having this burden and this passion that just wouldn't really leave me. And then on a sabbatical in 2014, working with a writing coach, began just sitting down saying, okay, so what would this look like? And initially we had one idea, then came up with another, and then we sort of came back to this central concept of, I just think people in general don't understand what it means to lament. And that for me was a helpful category that just really explained the previous years of my life. And so it's not as though I started my grief journey knowing what lament was. Rather, what happened is I was like experimenting accidentally with it. And then when I found the category, I was like, oh, this is what's been going on in my life for the last 6 to 7 years. And then wanted to try and talk about it in a way that would help have people have the same experience that I did, and just kind of discovering, oh, this is what's been going on. And then once you know about it, you begin to see it all throughout the Bible, because it's all throughout the Bible.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you said that there were so many people who were asking you, okay, can you give this to me? And as I've seen it go out into the world, it's so clear that it struck a nerve. It has done really well, and it's encouraged the faith of so many, and it's won awards. And so, one, I wonder, did you expect this kind of reception? Of course, almost no one expects it, but what are some stories that you've received on how people have been blessed by this book?
Yeah, no, it's actually shocking to me that people are reading it. I mean, and Trillia, something kind of goes through your head when you're writing a book. You go through these stages of, this is an amazing opportunity to I can really do this, to like you quit 1,000 times on the project. And my poor wife, how many times I said, this is a huge mistake, Crossway should never have allowed me to do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, when the awards were given, I literally packed up my computer, and they happened to say the name of the book as my computer was closing down, and I flipped my computer back up to say, wait a minute, I think something just happened here. And my wife, was like, what does this mean? And I'm like, I have no idea. And it's just been a crazy journey of just like, never intended to just do anything else other than, look, I just want to help people who are hurting. And yeah, I got an email today from someone, and I get an email just about maybe 2-3 times a week, from a mom whose 30-year-old son, it's a tragic story, who his wife had just given birth to their firstborn son. He had a massive heart attack, gave him CPR. 3 weeks later, he goes into a coma. He dies. They have grandchildren that were burned in a incident in the kitchen. And she just talks about this sort of stacking up of grief in her life, and realizing that she simply is praying, God, I want my circumstances to change. And, she writes about the fact that it was an aha moment for her to realize that not only are her circumstances not going to change, but she knows she needs to be content and joyful in that. But what does she do with the gap in between? Like, the Bible tells us to rejoice always. We all know that we're supposed to rejoice. This woman knows that she's supposed to rejoice. The issue isn't if that's true. The issue is, how do you get there? And so she wrote about how the book was helpful to give her a language or a path, to move her from where she is to where she needs to be in the Lord. And so that story is just repeated over and over. Along with people, the most common thing that people have said is, this book just described the last 5 years of my life. I had no idea exactly what I was going through. This actually is it. So that was the goal, and I'm thankful that the Lord has seen fit to help hurting people, because that's what we wanted to do.
Well, amen. I wonder, at the top of this hour, I talked about how the Lord helped me learn to lament. And I'm using the word, assuming I know what it means, but I wonder why you chose lament as your focus. I think it's hard for people to lament.
Yeah.
And so I wondered because there's all sorts of different ways that I'm assuming you could have gone, but you went to lament, which I think is really important. So why that direction?
Because I found that lament was not only a biblical language, but it was terribly missing in our Christian lexicon. If 1 out of every 3 Psalms is lament, it just seems like it ought to be more a part of our life and our even our Christian experience, maybe even our worship. If you were to look at the number of songs that we sing on a typical Sunday morning, our diet of worship in 21st century America is not 1 out of every 3 songs being something in regards to lament. No. And so what I wanted to do is not just talk about grief, but I wanted to talk about a language that the Bible is given as a tool to move us from our pain in order to being able to choose to trust. And I find that most believers who've really studied their Bibles, they want to get there. They just don't know how. Or if they've really studied their Bible, they've come to the conclusion that the belief in God's sovereignty means that you never acknowledge this is really hard.
Yep.
And so I found that Christians lived in 2 ditches, either the ditch of denial, they go to church and they're like, everything's fine, or despair, like, if I feel like this, God must not be true, and must not even be a Christian anymore. And I'm just like, lament is like right in the middle that holds these 2 things in tension, and just says, look, this is the language of God's people when they know God is good, but life is really, really tough. So lament to me captures the essence of that. And I found it to be helpful in my own soul, and I found it to be helpful in the life of our church in a way that was just really, really surprising.
Okay, so if what you're saying is true, that we don't have a language for lament, we struggle with actually practicing lament, if I may use that word, can you give us an example? Give us an example of what lament might look like in the life of someone who's grieving, which right now, are a lot of people.
Oh,
What,
sure.
yeah, what
Yeah,
do
I mean, for one, I'll answer your question in just a second here, but one, the Book of Lamentations is about what happens when an entire culture falls apart. And so, and we love that book, right? Because it says the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Many of us don't realize is that Jeremiah pronounced that over a situation that looked like a disaster.
Mhm.
We tend to think of that verse as, a beautiful little cabin in the mountains. No, it looks like a wasteland. And Jeremiah has the faith to say, look, every day God is still good. And especially right now in the middle of this kind of global pandemic and everything else that's going on, it's just good to be reminded tomorrow morning when we wake up, God is still going to be good.
Yeah.
So if we start with the definition of lament, I defined it as a prayer in pain that leads to trust. So it's a prayer language. I'm talking to God. That's why I argue that to cry is human, but to lament is uniquely Christian. It's a prayer in pain. I'm hurting. It leads somewhere, and it leads to trust. And it involves usually four key elements where I'm going to turn to God, lay out my complaint. I'm going to ask boldly for his help and choose to trust. And so, many of us grew up in the church with kind of a prayer model of acts, adore, confess, thanks, and supplication. And I would just suggest that maybe this could be a helpful structure for people to not only study maybe some of the lament psalms to see this turn, complain, ask, trust structure in it, but also then to use that as a model for their own prayer times. Just to say, God, I'm hurting, but I'm going to come to you. I'm going to tell you honestly what's really going on in my soul, because you actually know it anyways. I'm going to ask you to help me because your promises are true. And then I'm going to choose to trust, because at the end of the day, I know that you're good, even though I'm getting ready to leave the house. And this is going to be a hard day, but you're still good. So in our own personal prayer times and how we express our grief, lament can really kind of be like some tracks that we can run our pain along to get us from where we are to where God wants us to be.
That's really good. I love that you emphasized he already knows. I think sometimes we don't want to say things out loud that are hard, that are confessional, like confessing even sin, because we either shame, guilt, or I think we forget God's all knowing. He knows. And so it's good to know that we aren't going to a God who doesn't already know and hasn't covered us. Okay, you mentioned complaint. I know that even in my own heart, it is hard to reconcile the idea of complaining. I read Psalms. I confess, someone who is a Bible teacher reads the Psalms like, sometimes I read them like, can you really say that? And so tell us about complaint and what that really looks like, and how can you do it and honor God? Because I think some people would be confused.
Right. And just to kind of load up even further, you're kind of about the Psalms. I mean, they just weren't, they weren't just saying it. Imagine people singing that. I mean, like setting the music and there's people around you and you're all saying, how long, oh Lord, will you forget me forever? Or my God, why have you forsaken me? Or, how long will wicked rulers be allied with you? Those who frame injustice by statute. I mean, there's some spicy stuff in those Psalms. And I think it serves the church to really maybe reclaim some of that gutsy, earthy kind of life is tough, but we can trust you. So, complaint, we need to understand first and foremost that you can sinfully complain. I mean, I'm not saying that you get a right to just do an emotional vomit where you tell God how unfair he is and why he's done you wrong and how you didn't sign up for this. Like you can 100% be sinful in your complaint. What I'm suggesting is that in the context of lament, complaint is where we lay out our burdens to the Lord and we say, I know you're sovereign. This doesn't fit. I know that you're good. I don't see how that's true here. Or in the book, I talk about the fact that after our stillborn daughter died and we found out we were pregnant, and then we go to the doctor's office only to discover that she's got what's called a blighted ovum, which is a pregnancy that already terminated in the womb. So we found out about a miscarriage before the miscarriage happened, but all our numbers are going up. So we're in the same ultrasound room that we found out that our daughter had died. We're at the same doctor's office. We get in the car and my wife says in prayer, God, I know you're not mean, but it really feels like it today. That's a complaint where we just say, I know, but, and I think God knows that those things are a part of our souls. And our complaints, if we just terminate in complaint, all we've done is to be sinful. But if we allow complaint to be a conduit to move us to trust, it becomes a very helpful way of talking to the Lord. So complaint by itself isn't sufficient. It's designed to be part of a process where we're talking to the Lord. And the Bible is full of them. Even Jesus on the cross, says, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's a lot of things in the Bible that reflect things that we feel that we know aren't true, but man, they feel true nonetheless in the moment because of how hard life can be.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned challenges and miscarriage and miscarriages, and just when you think of lament, and maybe even some of the benefits of maybe how helpful it was spiritually just to be able to talk to the Lord that way. You probably have some people who are listening who are like, man, it's kind of scary. I've never prayed that way. Like, what encouragement would you have to people that, hey, this can actually be helpful, and maybe in ways that we don't even know?
Yeah. I might start crying. just listening about your wife and just the thought of my own sorrows. And just to know how near God is to the brokenhearted. So
That's right.
I think the reality is what I'm experiencing right this moment is just that the Lord just was really real to me.
Mm.
And so as I was able to not I couldn't put on a happy face. I couldn't pull up bootstraps. I couldn't get myself out of it. All I could do was cry out to the Lord.
Right.
And so I was at an end of myself. So the benefit for me was a deeper relationship and abiding in Jesus like I hadn't before. And so it led me to the Lord. Now, and I know that some sorrows do, and some people struggle with anger towards the Lord or anger in general. And so we're all processing in different ways and in different spaces and where stages where we are. And I experienced some of that too, like, why, Lord? Why? This person doesn't want a child. I long for a child.
Right.
And so those were some of those honest questions that I asked God. And then he just continued to draw near to me and in a real way and comfort me and remind me of his character. I think of that. Whom have I in heaven but you? I felt that in a real way. So for me, the benefit is just God has always been faithful, and I can say that without a trite bone in my body, without trite, or he has been faithful, and he will be again. And so, and it helps me with the future. I will say, I think that part of that drawing near and came because I was in the Word before my suffering.
Right.
And so I do believe that the Lord used a lot of Bible reading and trying to learn about him in that moment when it was really difficult to read. And so those are just some things. But God, I think he prepared me for that time of sorrow. And I've had other sorrows too. My older sister passed away, died about 7 years ago of a heart attack, and it's just so sad. My father died when I was 19, so death has been a part of my my husband. Both of his brothers committed suicide. So we are very familiar with death, and it's so even those promises, every tear wiped away. I mean, it's just real. It's something that I just believe and I long for, and he continues to draw near and comfort and encourage us in our grief. And
so let me ask you, since you've walked through so many difficult seasons, do you feel like other people around you understood when you were lamenting? Or what was, well, you've already nodded your head, you're shaking your head. So, but what was your sense of how people understood what was going on as you were even just talking to them about how sad you were?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition, and I think it said mourning in silence or caring in silence or something like that. How to care for someone without saying anything at all.
Right.
Because in a lot of instances, I experienced maybe Job's friends, people who were good intentioned, but would say things that were harmful. And especially with miscarriages, I don't know what it is, but people, I think they want you to either get over it or they feel things. They suggest certain ways that you should respond, or they'll say really, again, well-meaning things like, "Oh, next time," or "It try again," and so the Lord gave me a lot of grace for the people who would say, and I just was able to block out some of those voices. There are a few that were really hard and harmful, but yeah. So the answer is, books like your book will help people learn how to lament with their friends. I think that is one of the benefits of reading books like yours, because I think when we read something like Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, we start to gain an understanding of what other people are going through.
Right.
And so I have found that some of those books are even that much more beneficial for the other reader, for the people who are trying to understand how to care for the person who is struggling. And I think the saying goes something like, if you live long enough, you will suffer too. I mean, we are all going to experience suffering in one degree or the other. But I do think understanding how to lament will only serve as we try to love the church, love people around us. So people failed, but there's grace for that. So.
Well, isn't it so true that grief is scary? And I remember when I was writing the book, there was a family that was walking through a cancer diagnosis with their 18 to 19-year-old son, and it was not looking good. And eventually he passed away. And I remember the dad just leaning over an ottoman, little footstool by a chair in their home, just weeping and weeping and how long, Lord, why? And I've written a book on this, and his grief was freaking me out. I mean, I got a category for this, but everything within me wanted him to stop, even though I knew what he was doing was biblically helpful and was really, I'm sure, therapeutic for his own soul. But it's scary. And if you don't have a category or a language for it, you can tend to kind of want to hush people up because you want their grief to stop, because their pain makes you really nervous that you're going to hurt like that someday.
No, you're exactly right. And I wonder what it is, Mark, that because we're a church, right? We're supposed to be communal and together and lamenting, and both we mourn with those who mourn, we rejoice with those who rejoice. So why do you think that it is hard for us to share deep hurts with one another?
I think two reasons. One, I think it's because the church in general has an underdeveloped understanding of suffering. Suffering doesn't sell well in American Christianity. We're a great triumphal people. We love victory in Jesus, and when the saints come marching in, we love that kind of stuff, and shout to the Lord. I'm kind of dating myself with some songs here right now, but we love kind of that triumphal tone. And I think it reveals a blind spot in what it means to suffer, or when recessions don't go away, or it's part of what we're dealing right now in this cultural crisis, when you can't fix a pandemic quickly. And where do you go when these things are like this? And so I think that's a really important thing for us to think through and to consider. And I also just think that we don't like to suffer, so we want to get through it as quick as possible. And sometimes God wants to use things that are hard to teach us really deep lessons. And it's just not the playbook that some of us signed up for. It's the playbook of the Bible, but it's not the playbook that we were taught or understood.
I wonder if also um, there's a shame aspect. I think I mentioned shame earlier. Like a fear of being um, related to as a victim, like a perpetual.
Sure.
I wonder if that is some of it also, at least for women. I wonder if
Oh,
that.
I'm sure it is. That's a great insight. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. I think that's 100% true. Um, because it's only so many times you can get the look of, oh, you're so broken when you share something, and you begin to learn. I don't want people to think I'm that way. And I don't want to acknowledge that I'm that weak. I think that's just part of both our pride, and also just the broken nature of the world in which we live.
Yeah. It makes me think of Ray Ortland, who is a pastor. Well, he's a retired pastor, writer, theologian, and he says something to the effect of we need gospel cultures. So not just gospel, our cultures need to be
Right.
saturated by gospel grace and living. And that will probably help us to be open and honest, not just about lament, but about sin in general.
Right.
Can I read a quote that I have here from your book real quick?
Sure.
Okay. So it says, by asking God for help, we are not only marshaling, I need glasses evidently. So by asking God for help, we are not only marshaling the resources of an omnipotent God, we are also reminding our hearts that God can be trusted. How is asking for help related to trust? I think we've hit on it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, just as we ask, we're reminding our hearts of the promises that we know that are true. It's sort of like when we're singing a song on Sunday, we're not just rehearsing, these concepts. We're reminding our hearts, along with, used to be a congregation of people together. All these other people believe this. Awesome! It helps you to trust the Lord even more. So as we ask, it reinforces, oh, that's right, I can ask because these promises are true. I can ask because God is faithful. And in the asking, it actually reaffirms who God is.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's hilarious because we have about 150 different questions here. And there's no way we're going to get to them. But I'm going to flash these books because we were going to be talking about God's Very Good Idea, which is my kids' book, and Weep With Me, which is your newest book. And I've been grateful to contribute a prayer to this book. And so I want us to, I'd love to just hear your heart behind Weep With Me before we wrap this up. I love that you took your lament, your idea of lament, and applied it to racial reconciliation. So I would just love to hear the heart behind this book as we get towards wrapping up.
Yeah, so as I'm writing the book on lament, the Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy book, I'm beginning to also see a movement of racial reconciliation happening in our church. And that was somewhat by design and also somewhat by the demographics of the area in which our church is located. And as I began to really dive into lament and also be able to listen to the stories of my Black brothers and sisters and also listen about their experience in our predominantly white church, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. They're lamenting. And I began to discover that in order to really start down a path of racial reconciliation, you can come at that topic from history, you can come at it from theology, you can come at it from statistics, you can come at it from politics, or you can come at it from a perspective of these brothers and sisters are lamenting. And if you start there, it actually opens the door to deal with all those other issues, but getting lament in the right order is really, really helpful. It doesn't solve all the problems, for sure. And it doesn't mean that any of these issues aren't important to talk about, but it does, getting in the right order, it really is helpful. And so I wanted to strike a different tone and then also have people maybe understand and hear from others like yourself to contribute laments in their own words from their own experience so that people could hear what does this actually sound like. And then additionally, we took it on a civil rights vision trip. I took 50 leaders over the last 2 years to Montgomery, Birmingham, Selma, Memphis. And as we're it kind of jumping into American history. We're praying lament prayers, studying lament. It gave us a way to grieve together over what we were seeing, and also a way for both Black brothers and sisters, white brothers and sisters, Hispanic brothers and sisters, just to talk about their experiences in life and how to live out the gospel. And lament was a really helpful tool to kind of bring us to the table and have some good conversations.
Yeah, it's one thing that we can all do and what we should do in lament. And you brought together quite the group of different pastors and leaders who contributed lament prayers. So thank you for that work. Thank you for your ministry and what you're doing, Mark. And let's do us a favor. Pronounce your last name.
Yeah. So yeah, it's Vroegop, and the faster you say it, the more accurate you are. So you just need to blow through it. Vroegop.
Vroegop. Okay.
There you go. You got it.
Let's call him Mark, which is your first name, but
There we go.
Vroegop. Okay, well, I have so enjoyed getting to this conversation, and maybe we can come back and take the second half and really talk about race. And it's a big topic that you can't do in 5 minutes. So thank you, Mark, for writing the books, for all that you're doing. And I am now going to pass it back over to Joshua, who's going to tell you about episode number 4 with my good friend, Melissa Kruger.
Well, thank you, Trillia and Mark. It's been a privilege having you join us tonight. And thanks all of you for tuning in live. We hope that it has been a beneficial time and a helpful conversation. By way of closing, I wanted to announce that we'll be hosting Melissa Kruger for episode 4 of the Afterword on August 17th at 8 p.m. Melissa is the Director of Women's Initiatives at the Gospel Coalition and the author of several books, including 5 Things to Pray for Your Kids and The Envy of Eve. She's also got a brand new release coming out in just a few weeks. It's called Wherever You Go, I Want You to Know. And we are really excited about this book. And so in closing, I thought I'd share the trailer for the book from Good Book Company. You can watch it. We hope you'll stick around and watch it, and you can learn more about the book and what is coming on episode 4 of the Afterword. You can RSVP at wtsbooks.com/afterword. So I'll sign off for now, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks.
Hi friends, I'm excited to share with you about a new children's book I've written. My kids are older now, but when they were young, I wanted to make sure that each and every day they heard from me. The most important thing I wanted for them was to love Jesus with all of their hearts. I know that in this world there's so many messages coming to our kids each day that they need to be successful in school, and they need to be successful in sports, and they need to be successful in all of life. But I wanted to make sure they knew that the only thing that really matters is loving Jesus. And so that's what I hope that this book will communicate to my kids still, because even though they're teenagers, they still need to hear it. And I need to hear it each day as a mom to remind me, what's my biggest priority? What's my greatest hope? I'd love to read a portion for you now.
Listen, little one, I want you to know I have a big dream wherever you go. There's so much to do and so much to see. It's fun just to wonder about all you could be. Perhaps you'll fly planes that go whoosh right up high, or maybe raise crops that grow tall as the sky. You could be a chef and make meals for a king, or maybe on stage you'll perform as you sing. Whatever you do, wherever you go, I have a big dream I want you to know. It's something exciting, something supreme. It's my greatest of hopes, my dream of all dreams. And whatever you do, wherever you start, I pray you love Jesus with all of your heart.
While some days with our children may seem like they will never end, the years really do fly by. In the midst of all of our coming and going, all of our activities, all of our schooling, may we be parents who daily remember to tell our children that loving and knowing Jesus is the most important thing they can do. Parents, will you join me in sharing this message with our children?